Hi there, it's Jeff. If you've got some really sharp miters to do that are on acute angles and they're past 45 degrees, I'm talking about when your drop saw only goes up to 45 degrees and you've got to do these cuts that are 60, 70 degrees. And you're thinking, how am I going to do this? Well, keep watching and I'll show you how this simple jig that attaches to your miter saw can get you out of trouble. Alright, let's start with this basic jig that we're going to make for your drop saw, or Americans call it chop saw. So what it is basically going to be a sacrificial backing board that sits on the base of your saw, and you can basically use whatever offcut materials that you want to make it out of. I happen to make mine out of just some MDF. You could use plywood, melamine, it doesn't really matter, even solid timber. But what it is basically an L shape in the form of a sacrificial fence that sits onto your saw. But what I've also added is another L piece that sits inside it. And this will be the key part of making this jig to get your super fine angled cuts, or acute angled cuts as well, we want to call it. But what I've done with this internal L shape is actually fixed it with a couple of screws on each side, far away, so when you do turn the saw on your miters, it's not going to hit on any screws. And basically I'm going to attach this to the fence of my saw as well, put a couple of screws, one on each side. There's openings there that you can actually attach something like this to your saw. A lot of generic saws have that anyway. And then I'm going to show you my next step, which is going to be cutting 45 degrees into this inner L-shaped piece. I'll be adjusting the depth of my saw. There's an adjustment made on most of the drop saws for trenching and so forth, so you can adjust the depth of how far it drops down. I'm going to do it so it just scores my bottom layer, but we want to cut right through this internal one. But you'll see what I mean when I get started. Oh, okay. All right, I'm just going to adjust the depth of this. Yep. Yep. Okay, the next step I'm going to do here is set my saw to 0. I'm going to make a cut right in the center of this base, and then I'm going to just take those screws that I've put in here for the left and right, and then I'll be moving them up to the center line, which I'm going to show you how to do next. Right, now I've undone the screws from the left and the right, and I'm just going to slide this over till it's just on the outside of my line, the saw cut, because I know that that's going to be the end of the blade. And I'm just going to put it so it's just there. I'll put a couple of clamps on and I'll screw this back down into its new position. Okay, so now it's starting to take shape. And this is basically it. It's set up. So we have two basically platforms. This one here is going to be our basic jig on the inside, and you have a sacrificial board on which is a base on the bottom. So this is basically set to 0 on my saw now. It's on the 0, but it's actually, when I put a piece of molding in, that will cut at 45 degrees. So 45 degrees is our new 0, if that makes sense. And so we're going to add that to 45 degrees, 45, 65, 75, 85. It really doesn't matter what angle that you want. You're moving it from this point here and you're adding it to the 45 degrees. So if you want 65 degrees angled cut, you're going to move your saw over 20 degrees. 45 plus a 20, 65. So that's going to be your new starting point. And this being 90 degrees in here, because the two 45 degree cuts, just put your molding in there. As you can see, that's a square cut there, fits in there. And if I make that cut and move it, if I make this cut right now, that'll give me 45 degrees. But from here, if I'm going to move it over to my new measurement, and I'm just, let's for argument's sake, 65 degrees, I'm moving this over 20 degrees on my Mitres saw. Okay, I've got my saw set up here. I'm just going to do a trial cut and just make sure this is working fine. I've got a couple of off-cut pieces, just of some scrap MDF, and I've turned my saw now to 26 degrees. Okay, so it's roughly going to be about 71 degrees is the angle that I'm looking for. Okay, so I've turned it over 26 degrees and I'm going to make a cut into this one, put that into there, and let's do the two mitres and let's see how it looks. Well, as you can see, this is the result of the jig that I made. This miter joint here happens to be around about 71 degrees, which is really handy with that jig, because you can go past 45 all the way up to sort of 70, 80 degrees. It's never going to be achievable just using your standard miter saw, chop saw on the increments that it has, you know, especially if it just only goes to 45. So really happy with the way this works out. This is actually part of a project that I'm doing in my home at the moment with some inlay molding, and you can see that in a previous video where I've done a feature wall doing this, if you're interested in that at all. But apart from that, that just about wraps up this video for today. So I hope you enjoyed it or learnt something from this. If you did, thumbs up and share with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe, so hopefully you can keep up to date with all the latest videos that I bring out from time to time. And hopefully I'll see you in one of my next ones.